morning. Welcome to Lake Country Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Carrie Duma. I'm your worship leader, and my pronouns are she and her. Some of us are bringing our best selves to this space, and some of us are bringing our struggling selves. All of us are welcome here, and all of us are loved. All of us are imperfect, but we're here to drop our defenses and trust that what happens in this space is powerful and life-giving. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser than when we woke up this morning. We welcome you here. Let us move into the service willing to be authentic with each other, honest within ourselves, and open to connection in all its forms.
Come to this time of worship, worn, weary, or wide awake. In this gathering, we acknowledge the pressure of living, the tender ache of persisting through uncertainty, the courage of continuing when clarity is distant. Yet here we are, still breathing, still reaching, still becoming. Today, let us embody resilience together, not as armor, but as the soft, stubborn practice of returning to ourselves, to one another, and to the work that we love. Amen.
Our chosen reading today is titled, Cultivating Trust as an Organizing Strategy, Lessons from Mycelium Mushrooms by Adaku, Utah, who says, mycelium mushrooms have been one of my greatest teachers of trust. The word mycelium means more than one. The mycelium organism is a dynamic root system of mushrooms that utilizes trust as a mechanism to build and sustain a vast, reciprocal, underground network that connects the roots of trees and plants and skillfully shares nutrients and resources to support the health of the entire ecosystem with which it moves. This mycelial network cannot exist without trust. The mycelium communication highway recognizes and believes in the collective ability to channel and receive nutrients where needed, protect against parasites, and expand roots into necessary sites of growth. The network process also fosters intergenerational relationships that welcome the myriad of ancient wisdom and connections that reside in older trees to benefit younger trees. This stuff is so cool. These mushrooms affirm a commitment to building relationships of trust that encourage all life to bloom. One that I, meaning Adaku, Utah, aspire to embody more and more in my organizing practice. It takes courage to bring our trust forward and invite another person to meet us there. This sometimes sure, often shaky surrender is an opportunity to discover something deeper than the confines of our individual experience. A catalyst to grow beyond ourselves, to find the places where love can exist, even when we are unsure of the destination. To embrace a kind of faith brave enough to yield a wider focus, often unseen with a singular lens. Cultivating trust is an organizing strategy. It illuminates the distinct potential to generate meaningful communication, yield collaboration grounded in sustenance, bolster collective commitment, and acknowledge competence and worth. Trust intercepts blame and attack and invites care and compassion to take the lead. It takes the time to ensure that practices are aligned with values. In times of crisis, trust knows that you won't be intentionally hurt by comrades. It relies on our imagination's harvest and initiates possibility filled with hope and inspiration. It encourages us to delegate and share our work so imbalance dissolves and burnout fades. Trust invites us to come together for the sake of collective liberation. Here ends our reading.
Last Sunday, our guest said something that really caught my ear. Daryl Morin from Forward Latino challenged us with the question, what would it mean to live our principles as promises? I didn't get the chance to ask him exactly what he meant by this, so I have to make some inferences. Did he research UUism before his arrival, learn about our historic principles, and then craft his challenge to us from there? Or did this come from reflection upon his own religious traditions? It's really no matter because the question resonated with me and now forms the basis of my thoughts today. Our living tradition is in the process of moving forward with a newly created foundational list, evolving from principles to values. The same question applies, though. What would it mean to live our values as promises? Our UUA bylaws, the covenant that holds our faith together, states we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. It says it right there. That's what we're here to do. It's a simple equation, but it really changes everything about how you imagine this faith tradition. It is so easy for folks to say, Unitarian Universalism isn't really a religion. You can believe whatever you want, right? No, could not be further from the truth. It is surely accurate to say that this faith does leave many of the more traditional questions of religion to each of us to wrestle with on our own. Things like, is there a God? What happens after we're gone? In matters such as this, the questions that no one can really offer any specific evidence for, this faith assumes that for questions such as this, there are endless possibilities for each of us to explore, with the reality existing somewhere between heaven and hell, between nothing and connection to everything. I kind of lean more in that direction, but we leave that to you. But when it comes to the other primary religious question, what are we called to do right now in this moment, in this world, with the resources that we have? Our faith is actually very clear. And the answer we offer is not, I repeat, is not an easy path to follow. The whole point of this faith is to attempt to align the actions of our lives with a set of collaboratively developed ideas. These ideas were developed over many centuries using the democratic process, and it's one of the things that UUs collectively tend to say we value and believe in. I one time had a disagreement with a very wise matriarch at another church. Someone posed the question, can an individual be a UU on their own without actually being a part of a community? And she said, well, yes, of course they can. But I disagreed. Well, wait, couldn't an individual person say they agreed with all the stated values of our faith and just say they're a UU? Well, sure they could, but how would you know? Our faith is a faith of promises. It is a faith of relationships. It is a faith designed to strengthen individuals and families and communities. It is a faith that believes that since none of us can really know for sure what happens in the ever after, that the place to focus our attention on is in this life, on this plane, on this beautiful, messed up world we find ourselves still existing in. And it is a faith designed very much to adapt, because it knows that nothing is constant but change. A colleague posted a question the other day that got a lot of responses. My friend Lucas wrote, "Is liberalism a relic rather than a meaningful or necessary theological response today?" He went on to say, "The emphasis on personal freedom of belief strikes me as irrelevant in the face of the crises that we are posing with. The emphasis on human goodness strikes me as wholly inadequate for addressing the vicious impulses unleashed in our current politics. And the emphasis on optimism and progress just seems to be out of touch." He goes on to say, "But I also don't know what we are or should be without it." And I must admit, I wrestle with this question myself quite frequently. And my other colleagues dove into responses to this question with gusto. Lots of reminders that liberal religion and theology is not the same thing as liberal politics. Because although they do sometimes lead to similar perspectives, this is not to be assumed. Personal freedom, an assumption of human goodness, an emphasis on optimism and never-ending progress. These all sound to me like the easy choices of a comfortable people. A movement filled with people that may have experienced and survived one personal trauma or another, but are perhaps not wholly up to the task of sustained, selfless, often uncomfortable choices that are required to overcome true societal level changes that are needed. No. I think the real challenges we are currently facing as a nation, as a species, require something bigger than just an individual search for what is true and meaningful. The power of this faith is that it seeks to provide a container safe enough and large enough to allow us to really wrestle with these concepts. This faith challenges us to defend even our most closely held beliefs, because we know that humans are infallible. And we know that nothing is constant but change. I think of this faith more as a compass than a clearly defined route to our destinations. Those values that we are now working to understand and to integrate and to work towards, just like the principles that came before, are our collective best guess regarding the direction we might each choose to align our efforts around to create the world that we hope to see. But if you really look at those values, you recognize they are all relational. No individual on their own needs justice until they've been wronged by another. Equity talks about building accessible and inclusive communities. Transformation talks about the need to adapt to a changing world, a world where much of the change that we need to adapt to is human created. We lift up pluralism with an idea that 2 minds or 100 minds or 100,000 minds working on a problem will have a more complete perspective than any one individual working alone. The interdependence value literally reminds us that to the best of our understandings, there's no such thing as an individual living in a vacuum. That everything is connected, and thus each of our actions impacts the rest. And finally, generosity, another value that really cannot be fully realized alone. All of these are really nice ideals, and they feel good to show up and say, I'm a part of a movement that believes in these things. But I keep coming back to Daryl's question. What would it mean to live out our principles as promises? Left to our own devices, the truth is most folks living in this country would come up short in trying to live our lives aligned around these values, especially without the fear of eternal damnation that so many historic religions have leveraged to attempt to generate compliance to some set of professed beliefs. But here's where the potential power of this faith lies. These values that we espouse, they were not created up on high, passed down to us as edicts. They were created by us and for us, both currently and from our ancestors that came before. And if we truly believe in the value of pluralism, then we come to recognize that attempting to align our lives to these collective agreed upon values is a choice that we can each make with the belief that the expansion of these values in the world will lead to the creation of a better world for all of us. The truth is, I've come to believe over the last several years that one primary source of our currently shared problems is an overemphasis on individual freedom. So what is a power strong enough to compel us to embrace what is most likely to be the more uncomfortable collective path? It is the power of community. And not a community that guilts you, that says you are less than if you're not behaving in exactly one way or another. But rather a community that challenges us, that reminds us of our chosen beliefs, and then calls us to simply attempt to live into them over and over and over again. A community that creates safe spaces for us to wrestle with our demons, to strengthen our own spirit so that we might have reserves available to help those around us. A community that encourages us to practice living together with others while attempting to create something larger than we could possibly create on our own. My friend, the Reverend Oscar Sinclair, the lead minister of Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul, Minnesota, was asked about the community response to the latest ICE incursions. He hearkened back to the George Floyd murder and how that has shaped civic engagement in the Twin Cities. He said, "There are two stories you can tell. One is that accumulated grief is a very real thing. There are a lot of unhealed wounds in this town. But the other story is that those repeated griefs tightened the civic infrastructure. The voluntary organizations, the partnerships, they were already in place when this latest challenge happened. They simply snapped back into motion." There is literally an invisible force that is created by community that has the power to compel us to rise up above our petty individual needs to make choices that are actually beneficial to the collective. The truth is, I'm an individual that believes in the idea that each of us that has been blessed with this life has a responsibility to pay back the systems that have sustained us. Our children's story today didn't speak of immaculate conception, or a hero rising from the dead, or a savior that had been sent to save us. Rather, it simply spoke of individuals that were connected to a community that was making and then acting upon difficult collective decisions based on shared values. Efforts that changed not only the lives of two individuals, but rather that sent a message that in some small way guided the course of history in a more just direction. That may not feel tangible and real, but this is why we gather. We can't know what our efforts will lead to. And my job is not to guilt you into doing any one thing or another. I think my job is simply more to continue to remind us all of our higher ideals, and then to hold up a mirror to see how well we are living into those chosen ideals. If I was not connected to this church or any faith tradition, would I even have been aware of what's been happening in Minneapolis? Maybe, maybe not. I certainly would not have been compelled on my own to drive 5 hours north and put myself outside in sub-zero temperatures for hours at a time. And I certainly would have been very unlikely to raise my hand when Reverend Nelson Jordan Long belted out the request for volunteers that were willing to risk being arrested during the next day's activities. I will never forget how hesitatingly I raised my hand. Even though I had gone through the training the Saturday before that led me to recognize that I am uniquely positioned at this particular point in my life to be one of the folks that is willing to take this step. My kids are just about grown. I don't have a job where a felony related to protest would actually diminish my future job potentials. I had a supply of my needed medicines with me. I had the number for legal counsel scribbled onto my arm. I was prepared. But that doesn't mean that after being told that ICE was not following the laws related to due process and that my safety couldn't be guaranteed, that I wasn't scared. And that does not mean that I did not hesitate. And that doesn't mean I wasn't completely relieved when the request was clarified to prioritize Minnesota residents because the legal resources that were assembled were best equipped to support local citizens. I'm here to tell you my hand shot down, relieved. That moment that I raised my hand was not an individual triumph. It was more the soft influence of a life lived within intentional community. It was the culmination of a journey that began over 15 years ago when a new father with a full-time job and no community stumbled into a UU church and realized that for as self-aware as I had become, I had this enormous blind spot that existed because I had no connection to a community that both challenged me to rise above my own petty needs, but also offered me the guidance, strength, and support to transcend those needs in service of something greater than myself. This is why we church. No matter where you are at this moment in your journey, your presence here matters. If you show up here hanging on by your fingernails, just trying to get to the end of the day, you no longer have to face those struggles alone. If you're trying to raise a child in a world that seems harder and harder to know what's right and what's wrong and how to give them guidance, you no longer have to face those questions alone. If you show up here and you feel like you have things figured out in your own life, but you have this nagging sense that there must be more meaning available than what you found on your own, this community gives you a place to contribute to something larger. I am not going to lie. This faith is not easy. We live in a society that promises us we can have everything we want if we just work hard and try to win the game that is currently being offered. The problem is, we all know at some level that the game is leading us off a cliff. The game is providing more and more to fewer and fewer an outcome that does not align at all with our professed values. This moment in history is challenging us all to examine our most closely held beliefs and determine whether our actions are contributing to the betterment of our world or if we are simply contributing to the problems we profess to care about addressing. For this faith to have any power in your life, you have to lean into it. You have to get proximate enough to others in the community to feel the invisible power of communal expectations. You have to be willing to try new things even if you initially fail. You have to be willing to try to sing out loud even if your voice is cracking. You have to sometimes choose the more uncomfortable choice, volunteering to help our children one Sunday a month, or being on a committee that meets once a month to make decisions about one aspect of our community or another. And as a community, we need to continue to get proximate with other communities that are experiencing the brunt of our collectively created injustices, so that we can both understand the impact and listen to the solutions that the community themselves say they need. And then we have to be willing to roll up our sleeves and do the messy, sometimes dangerous work of standing up for what we believe to be right. There's a great line in a song that I love that says, "I'm not a coward, I've just never been tested." Well, now I can say I have been tested. And I'm happy to report that I feel like I passed the test. But I now have a much more mature understanding of what that line in that song is all about. Our courage comes not from inside of our own comfortable bubbles. It comes from the power that we're able to tap into when we are a part of a community that intentionally gathers to strengthen ourselves. Do you want to know what to do in this moment in history? You're doing it. Just keep showing up. Be vulnerable. Be more vulnerable. Be willing to ask challenging questions, even if you think they'll be unpopular. Be willing to be challenged. Be willing to support those around you on their journeys. Help us all imbue the next generation with the strength and the wisdom they will need to address all of the problems we are not able to address in this generation. This is our path to collective salvation. And I believe in it more today than I did last month, because I've seen the collective power that can be harnessed when the moment calls for history to be made. Lean into your faith. Commit to living your principles not just as individual ideals that live on a shelf, but as promises that guide your everyday decisions. This is the way. May it be so. We have blessed each other with word and song. We have embraced the greater truth of our resilience, one that is terrifying to systems that would keep us isolated, afraid, and angry. For when we come together, we remember who we are and whose we are. We are a living tradition of people who love fiercely, serve mightily, and journey humbly with the spirit of life. May we depart in peace. May we depart as beloveds held together in spiritual community. Wherever we are, wherever we go, may resilience cascade within us until we are together again. All right, folks, a little story. I was at the biannual Unitarian Universalist Ministers Gathering. It's an educational thing where we come together once every couple of years and get fed a bunch of different things. And I took a risk, and I joined the choir for the first time in my life. And because nobody raised their hand, they needed somebody to do the solo, so I did the solo. I don't know how to sing. And I do these kind of things because I can't preach about things if I'm not willing to do them. So thank you, choir, for helping us to raise up our voices. I'm going to take a personal challenge. By the end of my time here, whether it's a year or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20, however long I end up being here, I swear by the time I leave here, this place is going to be singing at the top of our lungs. We're going to be shouting out loud, because that is the power. I felt the power in that choir with that room of 400 or 500 other ministers, all singing, all clapping, all moving. That is power. We got to get there. We'll get there together. Have a wonderful week. I love you all. We'll see you soon.